All right, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. So what we're going to be doing today is really tying together everything that we've learned so far in this class. We're going to think about the ways that demanders and suppliers interact in a competitive market and use that to find out about competitive market equilibrium. First, in just a single market, right, just understanding the relationship between supply and demand for one particular thing, but then we'll extend our analysis to think about the ways that different markets interact with each other. So we'll think about how does, for example, the market for labor interact with the market for the products produced by workers? Or how does the demand for one product interact with demand for a different product when the purchasing of those two products are related to each other? Or even, how does the supply of one product interact with supply of another product when they both use the same inputs? So before I get too deep into this, I want to take a minute to back up and just talk about what a competitive market equilibrium is. So as we've talked about, right, as we've talked about a number of times, when we're talking about competitive markets, we're talking about a situation where you've got lots and lots and lots of demanders, right, each of whom can buy as much as they want at some particular price, but none of whom have any power to set the price, right? And because we're going to assume that, we can draw a demand curve right, telling us how much demanders are going to purchase at a given price. And essentially what this tells us, right, if nothing changes except for the price, are the number of units purchased by demanders going to change? And this is, of course, just adding up the demand of each individual, because no one's interacting with each other in any meaningful way, right? They're just choosing how much to buy at a given price. And likewise, right, we've said that we've got tons and tons of suppliers, right, a whole bunch of suppliers, all of whom are too small to have any effect on the price that they can sell at. Right, so each seller decides how much they want to sell given the price without having any control over the price. And as a result, we can draw market supply, right, just by adding up the supply of all the individual sellers. And again, the reason this makes sense, right, is because we can talk about each seller making their own decision about how much they're going to produce at a given price, because each seller acts like they have no power over the price. Cool. And what we're going to say comes out of this, right, is some sort of a market equilibrium where a price emerges from the interactions of the suppliers and the demanders at which supply equals demand. The important point here, the thing I'm trying to belabor a little bit here, when we say this, right, I'm sure you all know, you've got the supply curve, the demand curve, and they cross, and the pricing quantities where they cross. But the important point here is, when we say that this is the equilibrium price, this price isn't set by anybody, right? Nobody chooses this price. Now, somebody obviously has to announce the price, right? If you're, the grocery store might have to put a little sign saying how much a potato costs, right? Or a buyer of oil might have to put an announcement saying, we're going to pay $40 a barrel for Texas sweet. But the argument is, in a competitive equilibrium, because of the fact that each supplier is too tiny to have any effect on the price, each demander is too tiny to have any effect on the price, whoever's announcing that price doesn't actually have any control over it, no power to change it. So if a supplier tried to charge a price higher than the market price, no one would buy from them because they'd have plenty of competitors willing to sell at the market price. If a demander asked for a price that was lower than the market price, no one would sell to them, right, for the exact same reason. There's plenty of other sellers willing to pay the market price. Now, something I want to make really clear, something I want to point out is, when we say that markets are going to reach an equilibrium, right, when we say that when we've got this supply curve and this demand curve, we're going to end up with a price of P star and a quantity of Q star, we're not saying that this is the only thing that can ever be happening, right? We're not saying that markets are automatically and immediately going to reach their equilibrium all the time. What we're saying is the competitive equilibrium is the only price and quantity at which there's no pressure on the market to change prices and quantities. So what I mean by that, right, let's say that we had a price that was a little bit higher than the competitive equilibrium, right? In this case, right, we would have more people willing to supply the good than we would have demanders for the good. What would that mean? It means that when everyone gets together, right, to buy and sell their stuff, at the end of the day, there's going to be some suppliers who have excess inventory, right, have stuff that they wanted to sell that they couldn't sell. And there's going to be pressure on those suppliers who weren't able to make any sales to try to kind of deal with some demanders, right? Say, oh, you know what, I'm going to lower my price a little bit to try to make sure I'm not the person left at the end with a bunch of unsold stuff, right? So the fact that supply is greater than demand is going to result in pressure to lower the price down towards the competitive market equilibrium. And likewise, right, if we had a price that was lower than the competitive market equilibrium, we'd have the opposite problem, right? At the end of the day, once all the buyers and sellers got together and tried to buy and sell their stuff, we would have some demanders who were left without anything purchased, right? You go to the grocery store, they say, all out of potatoes. And the result's going to be, right, some of these demanders who don't want to end up with nothing to buy, right, are going to try to offer a little bit of a higher price, right, to make sure that they're one of the people who's able to buy potatoes. So there will be pressure from demanders, right, to increase the price. If we're at the competitive equilibrium, nobody's walking away from the market empty-handed, right? Everyone was able to buy or sell as much as they wanted at that price. So nobody's going to be under pressure to raise or lower the price, and the price can be stable. Now, one of the reasons that I want to highlight this is this idea that we have, that buyers and sellers, when we have lots and lots of independent buyers and lots of independent sellers, the way that they're going to interact is by getting together in a giant market and having some price emerge, isn't the only way that large numbers of buyers and large numbers of sellers could potentially interact, right? There's lots and lots of other kinds of market structures that we might expect to see and do see in the real world. If we think about the labor market, for example, right? The labor market, we don't see that every day, right? All of the college professors and all the colleges get together and have some big haggling fest, right? What we see is that the colleges and professors match up and stay pretty connected. And that's true for most jobs, right? You go to the same employer every day. So in some sense, that doesn't look very much like a market at all. In another sense, though, right, if employers as a whole were offering wages, right, demanders were offering wages that were below the market equilibrium price, there'd be some employers left without anyone to hire, and that would create pressure to increase wages towards the equilibrium. Right? If we imagine a market, let's say the market for teachers, right, where you have all teachers forming up into a union, right, and then all schools generally negotiating together as part of a district, right? So instead of having a bunch of independent buyers and sellers, we have representatives of two sides arguing with each other. There's the same thing, right? If they agree on a price that's not the equilibrium price, there will be some incentive for somebody to cut a side deal, right? If they ended up negotiating a wage that's above the market wage, some teachers aren't going to get jobs. They're going to have an incentive to go to some school and say, hey, listen, really, I'll take a little bit less money. And so, right, market equilibrium is the only option, right, when we have lots and lots of buyers and lots of sellers, where nobody's under pressure to change. Okay, great. So in the next video, I'm going to walk through how to solve a competitive equilibrium in a single market.